Welcome to another video tutorial from RevitPocket.com. This video tutorial is going to be on placing columns, but not in the traditional sense where you actually place the column one by one. I'm going to actually show you how to use the structural column and use the place at grid command to help you place columns quite quickly based off the structural grid information that you may have in your model. So in this particular model, this is a model I've been using for most of my tutorials. You can see that I have column grids placed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to my architecture tab and I'm going to click on columns. Now I'm not going to use architectural columns, I'm going to use structural columns. And the reason being is there's a feature that's available with structural columns that I can't get with architectural. So I'm going to click on structural columns. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a family. In my case, I'm going to use a W10 by 49 for this tutorial. And when you look over to the right, once I'm in the structural column placement command, you can see that there's some additional information here, and the item that I'm interested in is at grids. And the reason being is you can select the grids, and when you do that, it will actually place a structural column at the grid locations in the rotation that they need to be. And that's really nice because you can quickly drop in a structural column system and apply it to all the floors that you need to, and so forth. As an architect, we're usually interested in getting the structural information. In the Revit world, we'll get it from a structural engineer, and then we'll put a column enclosure. So that's where you may actually use the architectural column. What I like to do is actually use the structural columns that I get from the structural engineers and modify them slightly so they appear to be architectural. Sort of a little trick that I use to kind of keep things moving as there's coordination efforts going on between the architect and the structural engineer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pick at grids. Now that I've picked at grids, what I'm going to do is now we're in the next selection mode of this process. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to window everything on the screen. Now what's really great about windowing in this case is normally if you window, you'll grab a bunch of other elements and then you need to filter them out. Since this command is very specific to column grids and columns, it only grabs column grids, which is really nice. So when I do that, you can't probably see it, but let me zoom in a little bit. You can see column grids at the intersections. I'm sorry, you can see columns at the intersections of column grids, and that's nice, and then it looks the way I want it to go. So that's just a preview. So what I need to do is hit finish to implement it. And now I'm still in the column command, but what I'm going to do now is hit escape, and I'm going to cancel out of that. And what I have now are columns at the intersections. What you could do after this is actually take these columns, you can select them all, you can use the copy and paste aligned and selected views to drop the columns in on the other levels in your project. I would say be careful, or not necessarily be careful, but be aware that when you do that, if you have different floor-to-floor heights, you may need to make adjustments on the columns to make sure that the base constraint is on the level that they are supposed to be and they're going up to the level above. So my little pro tip on this is what I'd like to do is actually take this structural column. So usually when I do work with a structural engineer, I'll use the copy monitor feature and copy in their structural columns. And when we're doing planning efforts, we'd like to understand our potential area for planning research. So we'll put we may put an enclosure around the column to represent how thick the column could possibly be based off fireproofing and a variety of other things. So what I like to do is I'll take a column, let's say this W10 by 49, and I'm going to actually edit it, which is going to bring me into my family. And what I'll do here is I'll actually going to drop in a couple of reference planes, and I'll show you what I'm going to do. So reference plane 1, reference plane 2, reference plane 3, and 4. And I'm using these reference planes because I'm going to create an extrusion for an implied column enclosure. And so what I'm going to do is I'm also going to make it parametric. So I'd like to put some dimension strings here to equal it out, and then a governing string, we'll call it. So that allows me to equal it out, and that will allow me to control the width. In this case, you should also be careful or be aware that I set up these strings to maintain, which is soon going to be my enclosure around this column. Make sure that these particular dimension strings are pinned or it will deviate slightly. In this case, they're okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an extrusion. So I clicked extrusion while I'm in the plan, and I'm going to actually do that. And I'm going to lock it to those column or those reference planes, and I'm happy with that. And I'm going to hit the checkbox, and then I'm going to give these parameters. So I'm going to select a governing dimension string. I'm going to add one, and I'm going to call it width, or actually let's call this one depth. And then I'm going to keep this as a type parameter, and then I'm going to take this one and I'm going to make this one width, and I'm going to keep that as a type parameter. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to one of my elevation views and just make sure that the top of the column, the enclosure that I'm making, is locked to the reference plane above, and that's good. And I'm going to load this into my project, and I'm going to use the override existing version. And now what I have is a nice enclosure around my columns. And since we made it parametric, you can actually select the columns and hit edit type. And let's just say we're going to make the width and depth 2 feet each. And we're going to hit apply. And now we have a 2-foot column enclosure around the structural column. And I find this to be really helpful. Then you can start to do your planning, having some sort of realistic idea or suggestion of an idea of how these column enclosures are going to be. If you want to take it the next step, you could actually edit that family. If you select the column, the faux column enclosure that we're making, you can actually click on the little associated properties button near the visibility. And in this case, I'm going to call this one column, and I'm going to leave it as a type, and I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to load this back into my project, and I'm going to overwrite the existing version. And what that will allow you to do is, so if you just need an enclosure to kind of understand what's going on, but maybe you don't want to see it, you can select that family type. You can say edit type, and then you can uncheck column, which is really just controlling the visibility of the enclosure that we created around it, and hit apply, and then that will vanish. So that's really helpful. Hopefully you find this video helpful. If you have any comments, please feel free to field them below or just email me. And thanks.